Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, DEI in Education, sponsored by NetSupport. Now, unless you've been hiding under a rock for the past few years, you've likely heard the acronym DEI in staff meetings, blogs, articles, and just about everywhere. And while it might seem like just another buzzword in education, especially in education, really, we know that it is much, much more and impacts learning outcomes, staff satisfaction, and school culture and retention for teachers. So we're very excited to welcome two guests who know a thing or two about diversity, equity, and inclusivity, and they're here to share their knowledge and experiences with us. So Joritza Vijalba is an educational consultant with 13 years of experience in urban education. She supplies many effective strategies and resources for educating and supporting BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and inclusive pedagogical practices. She also happens to be an author of culturally relevant children's books, and she is on a mission to create opportunities and experiences for students of color to gain fair access to resources that spark critical thinking and meaningful conversations. Joining her is Victoria Thompson, also known as Victoria the Tech on X or Twitter. I'm still going to call it Twitter for the next 10 years. She is a K-12 educational strategist at CDWG and an ISTE award winner. Her experiences include classroom instruction, instructional coaching, school district leadership, and being an education industry exec at Microsoft previously. She is known for her enthusiasm and expertise with EdTech, which is why you will likely find her speaking at many events throughout the year and giving advice to teachers and to administrators across the country. She also happens to be a Disney fanatic, so it's no surprise that she lives down in Florida with her wife Courtney and her dog Ren, who may or may not make an appearance on today's webinar. So welcome to you both, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are so thrilled to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We are ready to kick off an awesome conversation about diversity, equity, inclusivity, not just in the classroom, but really in the school culture, district-wide and school-wide. And I wanted to start off because there's something very unique about the two of you that we don't often get. You're both authors, published authors. So, and it's very relevant because what you're publishing relates to what we're talking about today. So would you mind sharing just quickly about what your latest work is about, what you're doing, and where people can find it so they know where to look for it?
Sure.
Yeah.
My latest book is actually my fourth children's book. It's on banned books, so it's called Mackenzie and the Secret Library of Banned Books. It highlights most of the banned books that we're currently seeing in the news and throughout media. And it's kind of like a way for students to be able to kind of like be exposed to the text. If someone has hidden it, if people are saying, hey, you shouldn't be reading this at all. Mackenzie and the Secret Library Banned Books is like that way of saying, hey, here's a snippet of it. And if who you are or your interest aligns with it, then yes, go out and read that book. The book right now is currently on Amazon and it's on sale for Women's History Month.
Woohoo!
Yeah. Awesome. Love it. So my book is called Elevate Equity in EdTech. So that's the official title. And it's all about equipping school leaders, instructional coaches, and tech coaches with the different tools and resources that they need to support all educators and all students. This was definitely a passion project for me, and it started directly after the pandemic, where I was realizing, Doritza and I talk all the time about how sometimes we think that we are aware of things that are going on and we know because we experience them. But then sometimes if you're in a position of leadership, you are surrounded by people who may not know that, hey, this kid doesn't have internet at home, or hey, they share one device for 5 students in one home, or hey, they might have free and reduced lunch at school, and that might be the only time that they get a chance to eat unless it's a snack at home, right? So these are all about ways that we can leverage technology, different types of partnerships in a school system. That way people can thrive, and then also have that equity element in mind when it comes to lesson planning, recognizing people and celebrating people in education. That's also on Amazon, and it comes out on May 21st. So we're at the home stretch right now. Yes.
So y'all can have one to read now and one to read in a
Yes,
couple of months
yeah.
when it comes out. So build up those libraries, which is awesome. And especially because you're talking about banned books, which is something that I know is very close to home to many teachers and educators these days, of kids not having access to everything that they should have access to, or being able to get a variety of resources and books, especially to help find stories that connect to their experiences and connect to who they are, which is one of the key reasons why we're talking about diversity and equity and inclusivity today. We want to start off with the big question, because it's a big topic, is what do you see as being the key challenges when it comes to DEI in today's world, specifically in education? What are the hurdles, or what are the big things that we're coming up against or educators are facing? And Tracy,
Yeah.
if you want to jump on that one first.
Sure. I think one of the key challenges is that people are making assumptions about what DEI looks like, whether if it's in schools or even these big companies that you assume should know what DEI looks like. From an educator perspective, so I taught for 13 years and then I became an assistant principal, predominantly Black school, predominantly Hispanic students. But when you introduce students to what the real world looks like, you're not saying everyone in the world is Black. You're saying you're going to see a mixture of people. You're going to have to accept that differences do exist. You're going to have to respect those differences. And if you have any questions, you should feel free to ask, hey, how do you do this? How should I go about pronouncing your name? Should I try to taste some of your cultural foods? And so all the things that we teach students from an educated perspective, I feel like as an adult, I'm seeing adults struggle with it. And the reason for it is because they assume that they know what it means to embrace diversity. Or if they say, we're a corporate company that embraces diversity because we have Black women working with us, but it's only 2 Black women and it's 20 white males. Or we're very inclusive because we have shirts that says Blacks in, and I'm not going to say company. I'm not going to say the name.
Because it could be any company. All
Any
companies do this. Yeah.
Right. So I'll leave it as blank. And so I feel like the biggest challenge is folks are not acknowledging that they need that extra help. During the pandemic, we've seen this surge and this huge number of corporations and schools say they want to do the work. And so they began to reach out, like folks like Victoria Thompson and myself and other people that we may know, because they wanted to do the work. And that was at the height of the pandemic. Once the and it's still not over, but once things begin to like go back to like what's normalcy or what we deem as normalcy, those same people, those same corporations, those same companies and groups of people have kind of like forgotten the importance of DEI.
100%.
And it's very important for us to keep remembering that folks are different. What we like, our interests are very different. The way we go about learning is different. Who I am as an Afro-Latina woman is totally different than who Victoria Thompson is. And so we kind of like dealt away with all of our learnings and went back, way back. So if you're reading the headlines, if you're looking at media, people are banning books, people are doing away with many laws that have empowered women that we fought for so many years, the right to privacy, the right to abortions, how to stand up for ourselves and how to have a voice. And it's like they're sending us back in time without realizing that it's kind of like erasing so many things for our students. So many things that, or ways that I've empowered my students in the classroom before, I'm not seeing that now as a global consultant when I walk into classes and I see that one Black student in a predominantly Asian class, or if I see 5 Black students in a predominantly white class, I'm not seeing that those kids are being, one, accepted for being different, but also being included in the daily practices or pedagogical practices of educators.
It's a really good point. And there has been a lot that's been shifting over the last couple of years, and it's gone up and down. I know it's hard for educators to even know what to do. Victoria, do you agree that those are kind of the key challenges? Do you have anything to add in terms of what else you've been seeing from your perspective?
100%. And I feel like today is like so like opportune because I'm also a moderator on multiple like edtech forums and education forums and things like that. So I'm going to kind of chain around some details, but here's a post that literally came through 2 hours ago that I was tasked with moderating. And the title is, Why is DEI Mandatory? Y'all, I'm not making this up, I swear. 2 hours ago, this came through. So the post, the body of the post says, I have been with my school district for 8 years, and they started making DEI training mandatory. I am in leadership and looking for advice. We do track how many people of color we hire and fire, but it does feel like the higher ups are doing this so we can tell the community that we have a certain percentage of diversity. It makes DEI feel completely wrong to me. I have always hired people who can do the job the best, and I'm starting to question the district's intentions. I also feel like I shouldn't be forced to attend a 2-hour training to tell me that I should hire or fire people based on race. Am I wrong for that? Now, people in the comments did gather this person. So I do want to say, before I got in as the moderator, people were giving extremely constructive feedback. But here's what I'd like to say. Diversity, equity, and inclusion does not mean hiring the minority candidate in a lot of different ways, because it's not just race, right? Like I'm a gay woman, that's a minority, you know, like there's a lot of different spaces that you can identify as a minority, but it doesn't mean hiring the minority candidate to boost numbers or outward appearances. What that means at its core is that diversity, equity, and inclusion helps to create a system of policies that protect, support, and encourage and attract diverse employees and candidates. So while I applaud the desire for this person to hire the best candidate, that's not diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? This means being aware of the biases that might happen at every step of the cycle, from the job description to where the role is posted, the interview process, the onboarding, the development, the promotion, all of that stuff. So speaking specifically within the school system, right? Like this is a very school specific area, but it happens in other industries as well. Now, my wife is an ER nurse. She's the only person of color on her team. She's done a lot of amazing work at the hospital, but at the end of the day, she's still surrounded by a bunch of white women. So what she's doing with her team is trying to figure out how they can recruit diverse candidates, you know, like what it looks like to break the mold of what the team traditionally looks like. But truly, when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, just like how Jerisa was saying, this means putting aside personal bias that somebody might not even know that they have. So diversity, equity, and inclusion training and initiatives really help to find and remove those biases from the process so that we can hire the actual right candidate, right? So it's not who we might think is the right candidate, but who the actual right candidate is. On top of that too, I want to point out that this might cause some discomfort, you know, whenever we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Maybe sometimes like a bias is unlocked that people might not think that they have, but these conversations help us grow as people. They help our organizations grow. They help us grow personally and professionally. You know, I've never been in a situation where I've ever wanted to be around people that looked exactly like me and thought exactly like me. So it makes us less fragile, really, on the macro level and also over time. So there's also the general history of, you know, racism and misogyny that's happened in previous decades, and that's very real, right? So it's not that this was born out of a vacuum. There's a reason why this exists, and there's a reason why we need to acknowledge this, and it's so important. It's so important.
I love what you said about the uncomfortable, making you uncomfortable, having uncomfortable conversations, because I think you hear it a lot. People say things like, well, oh, I'm an ally, or, oh, you know, I support, and they haven't challenged themselves with the uncomfortable question of, where might I have a bias that I don't realize? Where may I be not giving opportunity by unintentionally assuming that this person can do X, Y, and Z like I can, or has the same experience I can, or could even, like you said, can even apply for a job the same way or go to an interview the same way. So it's about looking at the whole perspective, looking at the whole pieces and parts, and figuring out where can we remove barriers so that everyone has an opportunity to participate, to shine, to be involved in everything. And that is so essential.
And the best comment on that post, like the top rated comment, said, it was from another school leader who mentioned that he, as a white male, had all white male department heads. There was not a department head in his school building that wasn't a white man, right? So school leadership above him came in and said, hey, what's going on here? And he said, well, these are just the people that I trust the most. And that was a red flag for his leadership. And they said, okay, constructive coaching, we're going to put you through DEI. And then over the course of 2 years, the department heads became more diverse, right? There's women, there's people of color, there's people of different identities and all that stuff. But it was his unconscious bias where he was like, okay, well, you look like me, so you should be the English department head. Right. Or you look like me, so maybe you should lead the science team. So now he's gaining diverse perspectives, and he, again, truly has the right people for the job. It's not just taking a look at what we think is going on. It's identifying who can bring the best skill set to the team. And that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about.
100%. And one of the interesting things we see is that when you do that from a leadership perspective, it has a really great trickle-down effect for everyone beneath, and especially in education, students. What does it mean for a student to see an administration, to see teachers who look like them, to see people who, are similar to them in these positions of power, in these positions of leadership? How does that influence and positively impact our young people, our students?
I think it all depends on those role models. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. It's very diverse. To me, New York is the most diverse city in America. But all of my teachers looked like me, right? They were Black or Latino. I had one white teacher my entire school experience, and that was my kindergarten teacher. Ms. Zuckerberg. I think that's the only person I remember not looking like me. She was a redhead with freckles, but she was honestly the best teacher ever, because my mom didn't go and say, hey, you have a white teacher, so you have to focus. No, it's more about, remember, you have to learn for the rest of the family. My family was immigrants. So my school experience wasn't just about, does Jarisa enjoy this? It was, what are you learning so that the rest of the family can learn with you? Because my mom was working 4 to 5 jobs. And so when a student finds a role model, and I'm just going to take away the aspect of looking like someone, because just because you look like me doesn't necessarily mean you're the right fit to be my role model. But when a student sees someone that they can kind of interact with in a way where you are showing empathy, not sympathy. So you don't have that savior syndrome, right? But I can come to you and say, hey, Victoria, Maggie, this is how I feel today. And you acknowledge my feelings prior to saying, well, you failed that test yesterday, or you didn't do your homework. That's different. And I think that people kind of get a lot of the aspect of what education is mixed up, especially people who haven't been in the classroom, because they haven't been faced with looking at a student and having to disregard everything that's going wrong academically and figure out what's really haunting that student, what's taking place in a house. And a lot of people, especially where I worked, when I came back to work, I worked at the same high school that I had graduated from. My graduating class was 500 students. The school population was 5,000 students. This is one school building. So I went to a very large high school, 9 through 12. When I came back, they began to diversify the community of educators. And the only issue with that was we had a lot of white educators there, because that was the time where, with loan forgiveness, if you worked for 5 years in an urban setting, your loans will be forgiven. So they were part of the school system for all the wrong reasons, right? You came in knowing that you were only going to be there for 5 years and then you were going to leave. So regardless of what kind of relationships you built with students, you were going to leave, you were going to be out anyway. And those teachers like myself who already knew that, I kind of didn't want to buddy with you. I didn't want to give you an in or insight as to who these students are, because I knew that you were going to flee. I knew that you were going to leave, or whatever it was that you took away from these kids, and you were going to take it to whatever suburban community you were going to throughout New York State. And so when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think folks forget about that equity piece, which for me is the most important, meeting students where they are, which looks totally different. My entire career, I spent teaching students who were overage and undercredited. I had 16 to 21-year-olds that read at a 6th grade reading level, some at a 4th grade reading level. And I taught advanced placement US history. My students already came to me feeling like I can't do this. 6 teachers prior to you already told me it's impossible. And I had the task of spending 4 to 6 months with them to help them graduate, because I knew my class was the last class that they would take before aging out of public education. And so I had to meet them where they were. If they weren't writing full body paragraphs, 5-paragraph essays for the state exam, then I would just say, give me one sentence. And what do you mean by that? So now explain it to me orally. Maybe this will stick. And we began to figure out ways where this works. And it wasn't because I was a Black woman, it's because I understood the students and what they went through. A lot of people assume that because we look alike, then I'm supposed to automatically know your situation. I'm supposed to automatically feel sorry for your education. Our students don't want people to feel sorry for them. Our students don't want people to make assumptions. And that's another challenge of DEI, that assumption portion, right? Or the assumption piece, where people think that they're going to go in and they're just going to change the trajectory of these students' lives, when it's, I don't need you to feel sorry for me. I need you to help me in the best way possible. And I'm going to also let you know how to help me. If that's, hey, I don't want to talk about history today, but I really like cars. So can you include cars in whatever it is that you're teaching? Or I know that I work at a beauty salon with my mom and I do hair, and I really suck at math, but if you can find a way to incorporate this into bundles and hair supplies, I may understand it a little bit better, right? And that's that equity piece. That's that inclusion piece, and understanding who your audience is, because it's not the next teacher next door. It's the students who are in front of you.
Mm-hmm. To expand on that a little bit more too. So like, I'm my first Black teacher. Like, I never had a Black educator growing up in K through 12. I also never had one in college either, right? So when I became an educator, I was my first Black teacher. And what I will say, you know, to what Teresa was saying, I had Black students in my classroom all the time that were sent to me because the teachers didn't want to deal with them, or maybe there was a misbehavior, and it was, go to Miss Thompson's room, right? Like, go to Miss Thompson's room because she'll be able to deal with you. And what that looked like to me was just a lack of understanding. It was making assumptions about maybe what a student was going through. And then on top of that too, it felt weird, to be completely honest. It felt weird that people automatically thought that because we look similar, that I would be able to mitigate that. And I do see in the chat box too, so I see, okay. I usually have my large text on. Isn't it also about challenging the students' assumptions so that they can take off the opportunities on offer, even if the educators don't? Yes. Okay, so Andrew, you were on the right track. So we had a great question in the chat box just about challenging different assumptions, because that actually happened to me when I was student teaching. And I am very transparent about this situation, and I talk about it all the time on social media. I was paired when I was student teaching with a very racist white woman who told me she didn't like teaching little chocolate children. Those are the words that came out of her mouth. She said that with her whole chest. Now, that assumption, of course, kind of went on to me, because I'm obviously not white, you know, and I also don't look like her. And when you're in this situation where somebody that you're working with tangentially literally holds the future in the palm of their hands, it becomes a very precarious situation where you have to navigate and you need to be able to play the game. Mm-hmm. So that was me when I was a student teacher, and I'm like, all right, like every day I wake up and I'd say, Victoria, you just got a couple more days with this woman, right? You got a couple more days and then you're going to pass your student teaching, and then you get to do your own thing in the classroom. And I'm also a big believer that you learn just as much from weird, chaotic situations as you do from positive situations. But again, I'm an adult. Like at that time, I was 22 when I was a student teacher. I don't know how I would have navigated that if I was a student of color in her classroom. Right. But what I can say is that when I was a student teacher as a person of color in that classroom, where she specifically did not want the children of color and also female students to be part of things like the gifted program, the engineering elective, right? The advanced art elective, things where her biases were coming in, and she's like, yeah, I love all students, but I don't want you to do this because I don't think that this is going to be good for you. The best I could do is pull them aside and also, again, coaching and training and say, you can do this. You know, like this is what one person is saying to you, but I don't want you to internalize that because you know in your heart what you want and you should go ahead and get it. Now, what I also did was make it so that way she could never have another student teacher again. That's another story for another day. But we just do whatever we can in our capacities to say, if this is going to be damaging for the environment of a student or the environment of the colleague, we have to speak up and speak out. And exactly like what I see in the chat box, this is challenging the assumptions. If we challenge the assumptions and we say that's not okay, or this doesn't seem, then what happens is we can do really good things and we can encourage people to explore what they want to do.
Absolutely. And I think that what you're mentioning, both of you talking about is looking at how people are seeing things and making them look at it in a different light, or making people realize it's not just A and B, but there's so much more that's going on. There's so many more things to think about. And I think one of the big challenges there is you have people who are like, oh, but it gets awkward if I bring it up, or oh, if I say something to her. So what are your best tips for coaching colleagues or coaching others to help build a more diverse and inclusive classroom? Like, if you see something, how should someone go about saying something, or how should they go about helping that colleague or that fellow teacher so that they can fix and course correct and remove those assumptions or biases, hopefully, eventually?
That's a good question. So I always try to work from the lens of seeking to understand. Again, that goes to the same question of just like not making assumptions and figuring out what's going on. So again, I'll give another example. I've got examples for days, but years ago, I was working with somebody where they were, again, with positive intent, trying to incorporate like African American history for Black History Month into a math lesson. And at the time I was living not in Florida. So, when I think about Black history and just kind of ways that we could do math with Black history, my mind goes to things like redlining, right? There's a reason why Whole Foods and Trader Joe's are in certain parts of certain neighborhoods versus not. There's a reason why certain stoplights and certain schools are in certain neighborhoods and not. So because this was a math lesson that kind of centered around area perimeter and things like that, I offered some resources and coaching because I've done that for a very long time. And they ended up saying no. They're like, we got this. And I said, okay, well, I would love to see, right? Like what happens once all this is done, because I'm curious, right? I'm always asking questions. So when I got back, I was really surprised to hear that their math lesson was wanting to write positive messages about Black lives on balloons and then releasing those balloons into the air. And then that was the math lesson. Now, thankfully, I did intercept before all of this happened. But again, this was seeking to understand, because as lovely as they thought that message might have been, it came off as performative, right? Like before we even get into the content, what does writing positive messages about Black lives on balloons, which are disposable and horrible for the environment, by the way, like if you release them into the air, what does that do? What is that teaching children about Black culture, right? Black people in tech, Black women in tech, Black women in mathematics, right? Katherine Johnson, Hidden Figures, hello. There are so many people that we could highlight. So what we did was we decided to really take a step back and, again, seeking to understand, identify how we could really put this into practice. And I find whenever I encourage and support conversations in that way, where I say, hey, I see that you're doing this. Can you explain a little bit more? It doesn't come off as accusatory or inflammatory to them. It's more of a conversation. So I like to open those conversations with a discussion of why. And then we can see where we can bounce off of each other and also how we can support each other in that process. Now, if it's a situation where a student or an educator is in danger, I'm way more direct. And I am not afraid to be that direct person where I'm like, hey, for example, another example, when I was student teaching, again, my cooperating teacher did an activity where it was like, if you were a slave owner, what would you do, right, to your slave? And I put an end to that immediately, because that is harming educators, that's harming students, and it's also not appropriate. That's not even related to the content. So that's when I step in and I am way more direct. But in situations where you could tell people are trying to do something positive, they just don't know where to begin or even where to start, the discussion helps open doors. And then the follow-up from that too is after the lesson is done, or maybe after the activity is done or whatever, then you have a discussion as to how to continue those conversations and how to support later on down the road. Because with diversity, equity, and inclusion, we don't want it to be a one-off, right? We don't want it to be, hey, we did this thing and then we're done. We really want this to continue throughout the course of whatever we do.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I started teaching at the age of 21. And so all of my kind of like teacher role models were like what we call like the old heads of the community. They've been teaching for like 35, 40 years. Some of them were actually my teacher, my sister's teachers, my brother's teacher. So when I came back to teach, I looked up to them to show me the ropes on how do I approach something when it makes me feel uncomfortable, or when I see that my students are uncomfortable. Once again, I mentioned I'm from Brooklyn. A lot of what we do is very straightforward, whether you like it or not. And when I became a teacher to students who were also 21, I was very straightforward, because that was the only way that they can also see that I care about you. But let's be realistic. We have to do X amount of things so that you can get to the finish line. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do X amount of things. Probably about within my 6th year teaching, I had a team teacher come in. She came from a different school, white woman. And I'm not going to mention her name, but I taught history. So a lot of what I did was hands-on PBL. If we're talking about Henry Ford, we're going to program cars on Legos, and then you're going to become a car salesman, but you have to let me know about the interchangeable car parts. You have to let me know, why did Henry Ford come to this? How much would you charge someone for this car? So it was still content focused, but students were able to code. They were able to build. It was hands-on, and they were able to kind of like play a role in the 1920s. And when she became kind of like my team teacher, she was more like, they don't need to know this. They don't need to know this. They just need to know this answer for the Regents. And that blew me away, right? Because I had already established years of our students, in order for them to learn best, they have to have a hands-on approach, because everything else has failed, right? Every other approach teachers have used with these students have failed. So they have to feel it for themselves. They have to build, they have to own it. And then watching her kind of like get her own class, and I would have to sit in, because later on I became a lead teacher for the Department of Ed. And I would say, no, this can't happen. What do you mean you're having just students paint? She had students paint the walls of her classroom for Black History Month with figures that they believed should be on her walls. That was their Black History project. And I was so blown away, because I'm like, you just have people painting the walls. The kids are just painting. They're not looking up about their own history as Black and African American students. They're not going in and probably interviewing someone in their family to figure out, maybe someone fought in a war. Maybe we can link that to some of the past wars, or how did that impact your life as a US citizen, or what happened wherever you came from. And so I had that challenge of, how do you really be honest with someone and say, you're not doing right by these students? And I would have done the same if they were white students. I would have done the same if they were Asian. I would have done the same if they were from an indigenous group of people, because the idea is, when you have a vulnerable population, my students were vulnerable. They were 16 to 21. This was their last option to get out of high school. They had already given up on themselves. I had students who were drug abusers. I had students who were teenage mothers. I had students who were working a 9 to 5 and still coming to my class at 8:50 in the morning to try to learn some history. So I'm calling them the vulnerable population, because they're the students that schools make a lot of money from and of, but they don't really have the resources to challenge these students. And so when I see her do that, I had to really reflect on, what was I taught when I was 21? How can I really approach this without her not wanting to quit, but reflecting on her own biases? Because that takes us all the way back. Just like Victoria mentioned, you have to reflect on your own biases before you can even open your heart up, or your pedagogical practices, to wanting to teach a predominantly Black class or students who are in front of you. And when I had the conversation with her about, what are we doing? Is this actually going to be educational for students? They're just giving your class like a facelift. This is just, it looks beautiful, but they're not learning anything. Right now, students should be celebrating who they are, and you just have them painting. This is like something they could have done during lunch. And her response kind of like blew me away. And she said she didn't know what else to do during Black History Month. This is a predominantly Black school. You could have come to me, the principal is Black, the assistant principal is Black. You could have come to anyone and say, hey, I don't know how to approach this, but can you help me? But also you're a history teacher. So for me, it's when you're qualified to do something, then I'm going to assume that you know how to do it. And in New York, especially New York, you have to have your master's, your first master's in order to become a teacher. And then you have to be in preparation to get your second. So most teachers in New York have 2 masters before even hitting their 5th year of teaching. So my assumption was, you should know about Black history. You should know about how African Americans have been treated in this country and beyond. You should know about how Indigenous people have been treated in this country and beyond. And so Black History Month, not only should it be a celebration for our students, but they should be learning about topics and people who we don't generally speak about throughout the entire year. This is only 1 month that you can take to celebrate. And so I don't know. For me, every time I guess I think about that experience, I think about how the system hires people based off of their degrees and not really understanding that some of these people are not fit to teach everywhere, right? And so, yes, you have this pool open where, especially in Black communities and urban communities, we need teachers, especially now in 2024, we need educators, but no one's sitting down to really realize why there's such a huge gap in teachers in urban school settings. No one's looking at those people who are hired and leave 3 to 5 years. No one's looking at the teachers who have students failing right in front of you. As an administrator, when I became an administrator, the first thing I wanted to do was sit in classes. That first 2 weeks, I sat in classes and I really tried to figure out student to teacher relationship, student to student relationship, student to parent relationship, parent to teacher relationship, what is going on, but also how are you teaching these students? Are you making the assumption that they all learn based off that one thing that you have on the board, or are you meeting them where they are? Are you walking around the classroom? Are you having conversations with Jonathan saying, Jonathan, this is wrong, but first explain to me, how did you get to this answer first? And so it's really challenging from, I guess, my transition from teaching to becoming an assistant principal to where I am now, because I don't see a real change in pedagogy or instruction. And that's across the board, not just the US, because I've been to schools in other countries, especially within the last 8 months. I've consulted with schools around the world, and it's an epidemic. Like we're losing students of color everywhere.
Mm-hmm. We got a good question in the chat. Is Black History Month a bad idea? Excuse me. If it crams the understanding of how Black people have contributed to society into 20 days of school? So my answer to that is no. I view Black History Month as a celebration of Black excellence, but I also celebrate Black History Month every month. Every month for me is Black History Month. Every year is Black History Year. However, I do place a special emphasis on February, but we do highlight Black educators, Black women in tech, Black people in tech, Black people in medicine, Black people everywhere, all over the course of the year. But in February, that truly is the celebration for us. And kind of like going back to what you were saying, Jaritza, about just like how people don't know, so like, I know when I was in undergrad, right, to get my bachelor's degree in elementary education, I was the only person of color in my program. And I was surrounded by a bunch of people, white women who I think meant well, but like this was really their first foray into diversity when they entered a public school, because a lot of them also went to public schools, but like some of the schools, everybody looked like them. Mm-hmm. So then they walk into a school with majority African-American students or majority Hispanic students, like, again, all kind of depends on where we were placed for clinicals, but they were a little bit shocked. So then that was the learning that they elected to do. Now, some of them did say, I'm uncomfortable with this, but but I know I'm uncomfortable because I'm 21 and I've never experienced it before, and then they did that work to get better. Some of them, unfortunately, did not. But it's one of those things where if you don't want to do the work, education is not for you. Just very, very plainly saying it out loud. If you don't want to do that work to reach all students and be the best educator and leader that you can be, then maybe this is not the profession for you. So on the bright side, they realized that pretty quickly and they got out. But then on the other side, we do have dedicated folks who were able to say, hey, I need to do some work here.
Right. And no one's saying that it's easy, right? Because
Right. This
it's
is
not like,
hard work.
right,
Yes.
right. It's not like I walked into the classroom or we walked into the classroom automatically was like, we know what we're doing. I was 21 and my first year I taught 21-year-olds. One of my close friends was my student.
Oh
I came
my.
back from college, spent all summer partying with him. Y'all, partying with him. September comes, I walk into the classroom and I thought it was a joke that he was in the back of my class. I thought it was a joke. And so even everything that I had learned within my bachelor's program, and at that time I was a first year grad student, I had to change. Like I no longer wanted to do the textbook strategies. For me, it was how do I get
Right.
you to graduate? Because right now you can't even call me by my first name. You have to call me Miss
Right.
V
Yeah.
because now I'm your teacher. But then I know he's embarrassed, right? Because he would have told me, but then he didn't expect me to be his teacher at that time.
Right.
He didn't expect me to be placed as a teacher for 21-year-olds. He expected me just to be a regular old history teacher. And so that even changed my pedagogical strategies. Everything they had taught me for the past 5 years went in the trash. Now it's, what do you need help with? Now I'm talking to you as if I'm your friend. We're on a mission. And then I took that same approach with the rest of my students. What do I need to help you with? How can I help you? Okay, you have a kid, which means you can't get to first and second period. And sometimes you might not even get to third period. So that means during your lunch period, I'm making myself available. And I know that's not the same for every teacher. I'm not asking teachers to make sacrifices. I'm not asking you to take your lunch period and do something extra. But for me, that was what was important. And it's still important. I'm not in the classroom anymore, but I have friends in so many districts, and tomorrow I have a women's history guest speaker conversation, 3 hours driving. I'm leaving my house 4 o'clock in the morning to get there on time. And that's because a friend of mine reached out and said, I want my girls to see you. And so we all have some form of thing that's going to drive you to do better for our students and whatever it looks like. I've never met these students in Staten Island before. I've never even visited Staten. I've never driven to Staten Island, New York a day in my life. Tomorrow is going to be the first time because I know I'm going to stand in front of students from my Sister's Keeper organization, and I'm going to share with them why it's important to embrace who you are. And so we all have that mission as educators, but once again, it's not going to be easy. No
Right.
one
Yeah.
thinks it's going to be easy, but we have to do it.
And then too, like, I think people think that every time you do something with diversity, equity, and inclusion, it has to be this big gargantuan gesture and like this big thing, and there's like a ribbon cutting and all that stuff. Baby steps are still steps. So
Yes.
even if you take those really small steps to just even be more inclusive, it's like, for example, whenever I go present at conventions and conferences and I'm going to school districts and whatnot, I turn on live captions whenever I present.
Yeah.
And you could do it on Google Slides, you could do it on PowerPoint, you could do it in a lot of different areas. I'm definitely a Microsoft girl, so I do use PowerPoint. But what I do is I turn on live captions whenever I present, and even showing them that simple feature, that is inclusion.
Mhm.
That is equity, right? That is showing people that I'm giving you an additional resource to do what I want to do and also help you understand my content better. And then whenever I showcase that, because in PowerPoint, you can translate into multiple different languages.
Mhm.
And then if you're on PowerPoint Live, they can translate on their own devices. I talked about how much of a game changer this is for things like parent-teacher conferences, things like curriculum nights, things like, like maybe like a district board meeting, just ways to make things more accessible. And again, that takes 30 seconds of your time, y'all, to turn on live captions if you're doing a presentation or if you're in a meeting. It's something as simple as that, where it's a baby step, but it works. It works. So it doesn't have to be this big ribbon cutting gargantuan, ceremony whenever you do something. Even the small things help.
I think that's a really great point, because I think a lot of teachers, and we all feel about this, a lot of different things, like, I'm just one person, how am I supposed to make a difference? And especially if you have a school environment where they're not supporting it, or they claim to support it, but their version of supporting it is making kids paint walls, for Black History Month, or doing things that are obviously not as well informed or well thought out. So for individual teachers, what do you think on that one-on-one level, like what you're just saying with PowerPoint, what are some little things they can do to promote DEI when they're working in an environment that maybe isn't pushing for that or isn't really supporting them in those endeavors? Are there any other little tips or tricks you can give to say, hey, just doing this will make a big difference or will make that baby step towards a better place?
So with the group of students that I worked with, we didn't really have any kind of like parent engagement, right? Because these students were old enough. So most parents would say, why are you calling me? He's an adult. Or why are you calling me? She lives by herself. And so everyone that follows me knows I use Microsoft Flip for everything. I used to consult with them, but prior to consulting with them, I used it in my classroom. Even after, I use it now from when I create videos. And the reason for it is because with Microsoft's Immersive Reader, I'm able to translate any video captioning. And so for my students, what I used to do is I used to create videos on Flip for the parents. And I know a lot of people are like, what? Yes, I would create good morning videos. And I would just say, hey, good morning, it's Miss Vijalova. I hope you're going to have an awesome day. It was never about the students in my videos. Never. And that challenged the educators. I never said write back. I never said create a video back. And what they would do is they would send a video and then I would respond, hey, your captions are like messed up. And they would go in and they would edit their captions. Right. So just thinking about accessibility, but also thinking about my parents who predominantly spoke a different language. Now they're able to use Immersive Reader to understand what this parent is saying. I had a student parent, well, it was his sister, but he lived with his sister at the time. And she created her video one morning. I didn't create a morning video because that was like during testing. And we all know during testing, you're like a different person. I don't know what I was at that time. I think I was just like walking around, just trying to make it through the day. And the teacher sent the sister sends a video singing Bruno Mars. Today, I don't feel like doing anything. And that sparked joy for me because not only did you use a tool that your brother's using, you taught yourself how to do it because you wanted to become a part of this community. So it's small things, right? You don't have to send a pamphlet home saying, hey, these are all the tools that your student is about to learn. And so you better learn it. You can incorporate parents into those small practices by creating small videos or suggesting, hey, today I'm going to celebrate Pi Day using this specific platform. Check it out. And you'll begin to see that parents are feeling included. I used to say I have an open door policy, but I knew realistically that during school hours, parents are working. So even though I have an open door policy, no one's really walking in because they're working as well. And so how do I include you in my daily practices as a teacher so you can see how your student is, not behavior-wise, right? I want you to see how engaged he is when he's in the class. That way you can also use it when you're home. You can say when you was in Miss Vijalba class, you were paying attention. And so there's things where I feel like DEI is also about partnerships. It's about cultivating a community in which everyone shall feel safe enough to contribute. And that's what I did as a teacher, even as an assistant principal. For me, it was, how can I include you into all these practices? And so that when I do call you about what Ron did, you can say, I don't know what happened, but he did so good Monday through Thursday. I saw the videos, Miss Vijalpa. I'm going to get on Ron's case on Friday. Like, I never really had to kind of like send 1,000 messages saying this student did this, 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 and this, and this, because parents already knew what was happening in my classroom. They knew I used Flip. They too learned how to use Flip. And even after, we learned how to use TikTok together. I had my parents dancing with their kids on TikToks, and I would play the videos as students were walking in. So the first 5 minutes of my class were students listening to music. And some days I would highlight the students' videos of them doing TikToks with their parents. That is joy. That is feeling included in the class. I taught history, and those TikTok dances had nothing to do with history. But for you as a student to walk in and you probably had an awful night, and all of a sudden you and your dad are just like doing a TikTok offbeat because your dad doesn't have any rhythm. And that's making you laugh because I'm about to talk to you about World War II. So I needed to keep you up for these 5 minutes before I introduced the subject to you. But also I would ask questions. Like if I did do World War II, I would say, so what were African Americans doing at this time? Do you know anyone that fought in this war? If you did you have any questions for them? How can we find this out? And that also made them feel included. So as a teacher, there's so many just minor things that we can do to push DEI in our class. Like Victoria said, it doesn't have to be this grand thing. It can literally be you including someone in your daily practices. It could be you sending out a memo saying, hey, I have an open door policy. I used to send that out all the time until I realized they're working the same way you're working. These parents are working, but they want to see what their student is doing. They want to see the joy in their son's faces when they're getting questions right. And you're not going to be able to film everything, I know. And that's why Flip for me was what worked, because I would do little snippets, I would put it together and I would upload it and parents can see that. But they also are seeing my good morning messages. I used to send text messages to parents. We had I didn't give my phone number to parents. I never gave my personal number. But we had this like computerized thing where it changes your number. And I used to send like good morning with hearts, and parents would write back, you have a great day as well. Or I had a parent write back, well, you're not going to have a good day because I sent Curtis to school, and I'm just making up a name. I sent Curtis to school and I laugh and I'm like, he'll be fine. So just building relationships is a part of DEI, building community, making people feel and understand that they are included in your pedagogy beyond asking things that are traumatic or are going to have parents and students relive their trauma.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I did that's just, again, so simple, making sure that students and colleagues see themselves in the content that you create. So here's an example, right? I wear glasses. I cannot pinpoint a book when I was a child that I can like remember clearly where a child was wearing glasses. When Encanto came out, which is a Disney Pixar film, it made news that Mirabel, who is the protagonist, is the first Disney main character that wears glasses. Encanto came out, what, 2022? That's insane, right? That Disney and Pixar have been working together for decades. And we have the first glasses wearing character in 2022, right? Let's just say 2022. Now, when I also think about how this relates to just kind of content that I create, and then also things that I do in classrooms and whatnot, just even identifying stock imagery of people with different skin tones, people in wheelchairs, I'm just kind of throwing things out there, right? People with glasses, people in crutches, people who might have like mobility challenges and maybe they've got like a robotic arm or things like that. I'm still mad about something that happened 4 years ago where I went to a website's stock imagery because I was trying to find just some stuff for a review game for coming back to school post-lockdown. And every image that was a stock image that was, again, free stock imagery was of a blonde white child. And I'm obviously not white or blonde, but also not are all the kids that we teach all the time always. So I'm just thinking, like, I always think, what kind of message does that send when the free imagery is this, and then the more diverse imagery is behind a paywall, right? So that's something that I very intentionally look at whenever I'm doing this type of work. I'm like, okay, how do I make sure that my content not only is diverse, but also appears diverse too? So that way we see people from everywhere, right? And people from all different areas and all different things. So that way it's not just representing one subset. So I always like to give that out as just like a, hey, here's something you can do right now, because it is so simple. If you see everybody looking exactly the same in a photo, don't use it. If you see somebody looking or people looking exactly the same in an image, might be a good idea to maybe look for other spaces. Another piece of the puzzle too that I like to implement is just celebrating and highlighting people who are doing cool things in their classrooms and also in their schools. Education is often a profession where we don't feel supported or celebrated sometimes, especially when things get rough. So anytime you can just give a colleague a shout out, a student a shout out, just anything you can do to say, hey, I saw you and you did a really good job and I appreciate the content that you brought. It's just helpful and it helps to boost morale.
I love that. I love like using modern mediums like TikTok. I'll be honest, I've never made a TikTok. I'm the old person who's like, I need to learn TikTok, which is embarrassing for an almost 40-year-old. But and then obviously using tools and then being judicious about the tools that you do use. Like you said, Victoria, like looking at when I choose content and I put these things together, am I choosing things that are actually being inclusive? And are they representing all of my students, or are they very narrow-minded. And we all know that kind of one of the biggest things in AI, right? Biggest things in education right now is AI. See, I'm just calling it AI. Education's now AI. And there's a whole lot of teachers using it. It's generating content. There's a lot of things happening with it. How do you see AI impacting DEI over the next couple of years? Do you see this being a good thing, a bad thing, could go either way? Where do you see this going?
It's right now it's a mess. I'm telling you that very transparently. There are a lot of folks right now who are laying off diverse staff who are tasked with artificial intelligence. And I was actually just talking to my wife about this the other day, where like even with self-driving cars, like remember when people are saying self-driving cars is like that's the next thing, but they actually identify people with darker skin as shadows. So that is why self-driving cars have not taken off as much as people thought it would. We just have such a long way to go, and that's just artificial intelligence, period. When I think about AI in education, there are promises, but there are also some pitfalls. Like I see the positive promise of using something like ChatGPT to maybe create like a PLC outline, you know, if I'm meeting with teachers, or maybe like an agenda outline if I'm pressed for time. But then there's a really big ethical component that we have to consider. And also we have to be careful about the people who are making these platforms is the term I'm going to use. You know, the people who are making these platforms, my question always goes to who's in the room and how are they impacting that room. And also when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, again, like my logistics brain, it also goes to hiring. I do a lot of work with people when it comes to if they're finding jobs. And, you know, I sit on a lot of boards and volunteer things and also forums here in the Central Florida area. And we've got great candidates who are automatically chucked out from the artificial intelligence and the screening, right? And again, this is all volunteer stuff. It's not with my day job. But I kind of look at it and I'm like, okay, so we throw out a diverse candidate, and I'm looking at it and I recognize certain language and also certain groups, but then the system doesn't recognize it. So then, you know, the artificial intelligence is that first pass. Then what we do is we go back as the humans behind the screen, because that's important to always be that human element. And then we go back and we take a look. It is shocking what gets thrown out just based off of names, location, experience, where they went to school. I mean, you hear stories, but as someone seeing it firsthand, I've seen really neat candidates automatically get thrown out because the format is not exactly what the system wants. And again, this is all artificial intelligence. Now, this is not to say that the people behind it are bad, but it's just something where I think we have to consider this. Not every resume is going to look the same. Not everybody's experience is going to look the same. So we have to be conscious as to how we approach these types of things. And right now we are still very much the humans behind everything, fact checking everything. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time.
Maggie, you asked that question and I just started laughing so hard because you were just like, you know, what does that look like in the future? And I'm like, it's impacting DEI now or the other way around. I always think about people of color, their parents, our students, and exposure to things. A few weeks ago, I was at a conference. I won't say which conference, but I heard a man give an example of just how much AI has transformed the world around us. And he mentioned his daughter being able to use AI to get into college, you know, in regards to helping her out with all of her paperwork, but also creating portfolios and even just kind of like helping her respond to emails that colleges were sending her and the follow-up emails. And the first thing that came to mind was she's exposed to that because of you. She's exposed to it because you already work in ed tech. How many of our students, especially our Black and Brown students, are not exposed to those experiences,
right,
or to how to use tech in a way where during the pandemic, our students struggled with some of the most basic things, like uploading something
logging
onto the Google,
right? Yeah.
uploading something in the Google Classroom. And we all made assumptions that because they were on their phones, that they knew how to do these things. And so with AI, I embrace it. I actually mentioned AI in my newest book, Mackenzie and the Secret Library of Banned Books, because Mackenzie then talks to her teacher like, well, AI is kind of like the reason why I'm taking this AP Calc class. Like I use it to like tutor myself, right? Because that is one of the benefits. If the student is exposed to it in a way where they can fully understand it, but the person who is also doing the exposing fully understands it. And with many of our students, they have parents who are not exposed to it beyond asking Siri for what's the weather outside, right? Because we know that's still AI, but it's not the way we have used it and are continuing to use it in the classroom. And so when we're thinking about DEI and AI, I just think about the huge gap and the people who are not going to be able to benefit from it, which are the minorities, right? Thinking about the fact that I had a conversation with a teacher not too long ago, I want to say last week, and she told me how much she disliked AI. And I laughed just as hard as I laughed when you asked the question, because I wanted her to give me like a reason that I haven't heard just yet. And everything that she kept saying was just, yeah, because our students are going to cheat and they're going to get access to things. And I said, how do you create your lesson plans? How do you create your lesson plans when there's specific content or topic that you might have forgotten about? How do you get that content back? Like where do you find the resources? You go online, you may ask a question on Google and say, hey, Google, can you find? That is the use of AI as well, right? And so when we begin to ask teachers questions or educators questions or even parents questions like, how did you get this piece of information? Then they sit back and they reflect on it. And I go, well, that's not cheating. So when students do it, how is that being deemed as cheating? That is also going to contribute to setting us back, right? Because there are schools that are embracing AI. There are schools with a lot of money who are exposing their students to AI. I consult with the Singapore American School in Singapore. So I traveled there already twice. I actually have another DEI presentation with them in 2 weeks. And they're doing the work, but they also have money, right? And so they're making sure that every student is equipped with the resources necessary. Every single student has access to it. Then I come back here in New York and I go into different schools and I go, well, in Queens, they're doing this, but in Brooklyn, you're trying to do it, but you don't have the resources to kind of get to where Queens is doing this. And then you're looking at the population of students in the classroom and you go, okay, now I understand why. Now I understand why you don't have access to this resource. And so the issues are already there. The challenges are already there. I just think not too many people are talking about them because we're still trying to figure out what to do with AI. And so I feel like once we figure out what to actually do with it and how to embrace it and how to use it in the class, right now, New York City Public Schools is creating a blueprint for how to use AI throughout all 5 boroughs. We're talking about 88,000 teachers, 1.3 million students. This is one district. And they're creating a blueprint because they know you have to expose students to things because they're going to use it regardless. So are you going to show them how to do it in a respectful way? Or do you want them just to go out and say, well, since my teacher said I'm not going to use it, I'm just going to do it at home and use it however I want to, instead of exposing it to them in a way where they can use it in a job force. Many jobs right now are going to focus on AI. They're already focused on technology. I seen that in the chat. Someone talked about just look at all the Black women who have succeeded in tech. And then in my mind, I'm like, and look at all the Black women who haven't succeeded in tech because they're Black. Who can, right? But because now so many companies are getting rid of Black women, they're not as successful as they were probably 2 years ago or 3 years ago when companies were hiring to meet a quota.
Yeah. I also think too about how so many people's jobs have changed, you know, because of AI. So like I know many wonderful, diverse people in big tech companies, right? So like we're talking about the ones who are on the stock market and trade every day, where they were hired as like a business strategy consultant. And then now their job has changed to like AI support, right? Or like now they're like an AI program manager and they're like, this is not what I signed up for.
Right.
So like back to what Jerisa was saying too, like it's just so jarring how this is even impacting at the like the micro level, but also the macro level, we're seeing very qualified people lose jobs, right? Like very diverse candidates lose jobs because everyone is on that AI pendulum right now. And it's interesting.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who are looking for work right now because their job is not what they signed up for it to be.
Yeah.
So even at the educational, like tech level, like the ed tech level, it's already ruffling feathers. And my hope and wish and dream is that people end up where they're happy, and also that this gets straightened out, and that way we have qualified people in positions instead of just saying, hey, by the way, we're dissolving your team and now you're the AI team, because that happens a lot. And people just want to be where they're happy and also where they're making the most impact.
I think of, because you mentioned it earlier, you were talking about hidden figures, and obviously like the great role models that are in there. I think about that when they brought the computers in, and obviously seeing an opportunity to then jump on something that nobody knows about, and then because of that, like Octavia Spencer character like was able to bring in her own whole team of people to take over because she saw an opportunity and jumped on it. And I'm hoping a lot of people will do that, will pivot and will turn and do things. But I also see the same thing as you. We're losing a lot of people. We're seeing a lot of things happen because too much is happening too fast, and it's forcing people out, or it's causing a big gap. And we're going to see that at the education level, where students who have access to it are going to be up here. Students who don't are now going to be back here because there's even that bigger of a gap. So we've come a long way, but we got a long way to go. It's the short summary, I guess, for that one. So in the interest of time, because I think we could be here for another hour and still keep talking, and I want to keep the time. We want to give people a chance to ask questions. We've had a few good ones in the chat, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in there for Teresa and Victoria, so we have a chance to ask them questions. While you're typing out questions, just want to give a big thank you to our sponsor for today, which is NetSupport. If you're not familiar, NetSupport develops comprehensive education solutions that empower educators, administrators, and technicians to enhance their teaching and their learning experiences in the classroom. So we have a 3-to-1 tool called Classroom Cloud, which provides classroom management, online safety, and IT management, and allows you to interact with your students and meet them where they are to engage them and create a better learning environment for your students. So thanks, NetSupport, for hosting the webinar. And we'll give people another minute or two to ask any questions. Where can people find you if they want to engage with you online and ask you more questions after this is over? Where's the best way to connect with you guys? Victoria?
Yeah. I'm on 2 platforms, y'all. So I am on LinkedIn and I am on Twitter. I'm refusing to call it X. It is still Twitter to me. So my LinkedIn, it's super easy. It's Victoria Rose Thompson. So linkedin.com/Victoria Rose Thompson, which is my full name. So that's where you can find like me and my website and all that fun stuff and what I'm up to. And my dog makes a lot of special guest appearances too. And then on Twitter, I am at Victoria the Tech. Tech is TECH, where my dog also makes a lot of special guest appearances. But I like to share information just about what we could do to make learning more accessible, inclusive, and engaging for students, school leaders, and instructional coaches.
Yeah. Teresa, where can they find you?
I'm on 3 platforms. I'm on LinkedIn, where I'm just Jadiksa B. Jalaba. On Twitter, I also only say Twitter, not X. On Twitter, I'm Jadiksa V_. And on Instagram, I actually focus on my travels as an international consultant. So if you want to see any of my work with schools around the world, that's where I usually post it. That's the fun Jadiksa. So my Instagram is jadiksa.v__.
Very awesome. Do you also share food from your travels? Or
Yes.
Okay, there we go. Sold.
Most of it is food, because that's all I do is eat.
Same. Totally same over here. So, well, thank you to everyone who's joined us today. I think we got through every question that had come through while we were going. So appreciate everybody asking questions as we went along. Victoria, Teresa, we loved having you on, having this discussion. And we hope that you guys will continue the conversation on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, wherever, and make sure you start questioning questioning biases, questioning assumptions, and helping to improve DEI in your schools. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, Ren.